Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Vince Rocco in New York, where the state of our industry can be quiet. So let's get right to what everyone is talking about. January and February are typically quiet. The phones aren't ringing. The market isn't demanding anything from you just yet. And that's exactly why, at this moment, it all matters. Most people start that year talking about goals, bigger numbers, more deals, clearer targets for 2026. But before you set goals, I challenge you to define your standards, says the author of the article we're going to talk about here today. Standards aren't aspirations, they're decisions. They are what you refuse to compromise when you're busy, when a deal gets difficult, and when no one is watching. They show up in how you prepare, how you do follow-up, how you communicate, what you tolerate, and what you no longer allow. Goals without standards lead to pressure and inconsistency. Clear standards create traction, so before the pace picks up, take advantage of the quiet. Pause, reflect, reorient. Because 2026 doesn't need new resolutions, it needs stronger non-negotiables. And here on set with me today is the author of the article that we're going to talk about today, Teresa Stevenson, and she is president at Platinum Properties, and Jared Anton, right here from Brown Harris Stevens. And they join me now to discuss. But first, let me welcome my listeners and viewers from across the United States and all around the globe. This is Talking New York Real Estate, so let's go behind the headlines and inside the state of our industry.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back. So we're going to talk today a little bit about an article that I've read a couple of times that Teresa here wrote, and it really, landed with me because I've spent a career in corporate America talking about goals, 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 goals. Fine, we all have to have goals in life, but we have to have a way to kind of get to those goals. And standards, as we're going to talk about today, are a way to get there. So, Teresa, let me ask you first. You are suggesting that we define our standards before we even talk about goals, right? So why is that a more powerful starting point for real estate agents, for actually anybody out there? I mean, I could have used, this article back in my corporate days 20 plus years ago. Why is it so more powerful to focus more on standards than it is goals and then work towards the goals?
Goals are great, but without standards, they're really just kind of a wish, right? I think standards set your behaviors, and behaviors are what produce results, right? So until you know what your standards are and they're in line with who you are and with your values, that's when you can really start to think about, then you can talk about goals. When you've got your standards in place, you can see what your standards produce, and then you can talk about some reverse engineering from goals if you want to level up from where you are. But I think getting those standards in place and figuring out what your non-negotiables are, who you are, how you operate as a person, as a business, is absolutely a minimum viable product before you start to think about setting goals.
Yeah, when I was reading the article, several things came to mind. The New York City marketplace, as we all know, we play in it every day, is very sophisticated. It's very fast-moving. It's heavily scrutinized, okay? Mm-hmm. And so we have to be better than good, all right? We have to, be better than just your average good person. So You mentioned the word behavior, and that's an interesting word. I wrote it down. Jared, so, when you hear all these things, as a high-level, executive here at Brown Harris, and you're talking to agents all the time, how do these make more sense than goals initially? As Teresa said, goals are great, and you get to the goals eventually. But when you're kind of, thinking big picture with them or planning, a big picture with them, again, because of a fast-moving, very sophisticated marketplace, how do you, get standards across to agents where they understand it?
Well, it's so important that as an industry, we try to actually elevate our standards. And it was a wonderful article that Teresa wrote, and it definitely resonated with me because for the entirety of my career in this business, I've been about elevating the standards of the industry, right? How do agents level up and do better? And the reality is, unfortunately, our industry as a collective taken doesn't have the best reputation. And it's our own fault in many ways. Vince, we talked on the other show that I was on with you about your time at IBM, and you look at many companies that have employees, right? Not independent contractors or 1099s like in real estate, and the company is demanding certain standards from their employees. If you don't meet it, you're out. If you don't meet it, you're not even in, right? Brokerage, in the largest highest level comment doesn't really put standards on their industries. BHS does, Teresa's company, Platinum certainly does. So companies do, but in the aggregate, many companies don't impose standards on their agents, and many companies also excuse bad behavior from agents that are bringing in a lot of revenue because they're bringing in a lot of revenue. It's all over the news right now, a bunch of different stories around that. So part of the issue is that the brokerage in and of itself is not always instilling the right standards in their agents. So the agents need to go and find it themselves. And something I've talked about time and time again on the show, when you're just getting started in the business or when you're in a pinch, holding yourself to the highest standard doesn't always mean making the most amount of money in the short term, but it means making the most amount of money in the long term, doing right by the clients, and building the most sustainable business. But it is hard always to do the quote-unquote right thing if you are in a pinch in the short term. And that's where we see very often that people compromise their standards to their own detriment, to their client's detriment, to the industry's detriment. And that is part of what we need to figure out as an industry, as a leadership team across the brokerages. How do we instill better standards? How do we hold our agents more accountable for good behavior and bad behavior? And how do we make sure that as a whole, we are reclaiming our reputation, elevating it together?
Reading Teresa's article a couple of times, as I've indicated before, I started thinking about my standards versus my goals. And again, every start of the year, as we talked about at the top of the show, January, February, sometimes into March can be a little quiet, not dead, but a little quiet until people start reactivating their thinking, their searching, their whatever. So I jotted down a couple of my standards as being ethical, as being knowledgeable about, our industry. It's being able to prepare better, when I'm working with my customers, whether they're buyers or sellers or renters or whatever. Communication is key, and I always think that I try to be a good communicator, being professional on top of all of that. These are standards that work for me. Long-term thinking. I think when people, do this and kind of think, in a little bit of a box and don't broaden their thinking, it's not a good thing. And personal branding, I can go on and on and on and do 100 shows about personal branding and how we get ourselves out there because people have to like us, right? And we have to be memorable. You hear me talk about that every week. So how can, Teresa, in the beginning of the year when we call it quiet, how can agents start really thinking about prepping their standards, reinforcing their standards before they get to the goals? Okay, so I want to do 100 apartments this year versus 70 I did last year, or whatever the silly number is. What do they do, and how should they start early in the year?
I think when we talk about standards, it's really important or really powerful to think about the details and actually the tactical, right? Because we talk about behavior.
Absolutely.
What does being professional mean? My idea of professional might be slightly different from Jared's or from yours. Mm-hmm. Right? I think there are some tactical things you can kind of hang your hat on as a starting place. Things like, how responsive are you to your clients? What does that mean? If a text come in, do you have to respond within half an hour, within 2, within 4, within the day? Mm-hmm. What is it for an email, right? Mm-hmm. If you are, when it comes to preparation, you talked about preparation. Of course, it's important to prepare. To me, that means, and I know for Jared, you have your whole listing process, Jared, that you talk about. That's excellent. But you've got to have your data, right?
Oh my God,
you've got to have a strategy, and I think you also need to be prepared for what objections might come up for a particular listing, right? And that's different from time to time. What else? Pricing. What are your standards around pricing? Or do you take any listing, even if it's overpriced? Does that work well for you? Does that cause more stress in your day? Does it make you feel like you're not in line with your integrity? What is your non-negotiable? When are you going to walk away? So that's responsiveness, preparation, pricing. The last one, which I think is almost the most important if we're talking about building business and long-term, is protection of your time, right?
Very important.
I was talking to a team lead the other day. First thing he does every morning, he gets in early before everybody else and he does his prospecting. That's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And if you say that your family or your friends or your, that work-life balance is important to you, or your family is the most important thing to you, are you texting at 10:30 at night? Right? So I think there are a lot of things you have to get really granular on. I think those 4 are really good starting pillars in terms of how people can be using this time. What are my standards for those? What are my non-negotiables? Right? And you're really starting to shift from this this energy of hustle to an energy of discipline. and standards. And I think you talk about brand, like talk about the best way to communicate your brand.
Oh my God.
If you're communicating to your client from the beginning, here's how I work. Here's what you can expect from me, and I will follow through every time.
Exactly.
Right?
Expect from me is big.
Yeah.
Because they want to know. You know, half the time we're in a mentoring situation, a teaching situation, a tutorial. They don't know anything, most of them. So they expect us to do that. Jared, we talked about goals. Teresa mentioned a couple of times non-negotiable. Okay, what's the difference between a goal and a non-negotiable?
Well, a goal is something you want to achieve. A non-negotiable is something that a red line, so to speak, that you won't cross, right? And as you are more successful, as you have sort of your basic needs met, it becomes a lot easier for you to do things the right way, to hold to your standards and to hold to your non-negotiables. Again, if you don't have everything you need, you're going to bend over backwards a little bit more, maybe unfortunately compromise one of your standards to try to get that deal done. But I think the biggest thing that competent professionals need to find confidence in and comfort in is that by clearly communicating your standards and holding to them doesn't make you any less professional, any less successful. In fact, it should actually attract the people to you that are going to respect your time, and therefore you're going to have a better client-agent relationship. It's the people that will answer call at all hours, will do anything that in many cases get taken advantage of by the clients, because like attracts like, and you're putting out that energy. But if you make very clear to the client, look, you're going to get my all. These are the hours. This is my non-negotiables. Obviously, if it's an emergency, I'm going to respond, but that you're not compromising, that time, so that you're protecting your peace of mind, right? That work-life balance is a fallacy. There is no such thing. It's trying to figure out that harmony and how you give and take and how you borrow and making sure that you fill up that tank. And that's the only way that you're going to be best for your client. So without setting the standards, you don't have your operating procedure. You don't have the way in which you're going to communicate yourself, with your client. And then you're not going to be able to hit the goals. The goals are just simply a list of things that you want to accomplish, but you need to be able to get to that by doing a certain set of things and doing them consistently and reliably. Yeah,
well said. And I think sometimes that we have to think about how agents may not necessarily understand the difference between standards and goals, or even what a standard is. Teresa, what do you think most agents often see compromising their standards without even realizing it? I mean, do they realize that they're compromising standards? Do they even know, as I said before, what a standard is? Goal, 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 right? As young kids, you want to do what you want to do, and you want to be the best at it, and you want to have a goal, and your parents, teach you about goals. But do agents really compromise the standards and not even realize it?
I think a lot of agents don't know exactly what their standards are if you try to pinpoint that down. And that's where I think this is really sad. Useful. No, I think, look, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that agents don't have integrity. I'm saying that it's not intentional, right? And I think the beauty of really articulating those standards and making them non-negotiables, right? There's a difference between a standard and a non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. Standard is this is what has to be done when it has to be done. The non-negotiable part of it is I've already made this decision, right? This is not something I have to waste time, energy, and effort deciding whether or not will I take this call at 10? Will I run into this listing appointment? Am I going to take the time right now to prep for this listing appointment even though I have 20 other things on my plate? I am going to, because it's a non-negotiable, and I always have that ready to go, right? Mm-hmm. When we get busy and we have to make a decision about whether or not to do something, it's far more likely that we're going to skip prospecting that morning. Right?
Absolutely.
But I've already decided that's a non-negotiable, and you don't have 20 non-negotiables.
No.
Right? If you have the 4 non-negotiables that I've already talked about, that's a really strong start, and you're head and tails above the rest. Right? Part of your prep checklist, whether it's a listing appointment or a buyer appointment, is going to be, what are those forms? What are the conversations that I have, right? How do I have them? This is the way the Teresa Stevenson team does it every time, right? So I think if you have all of that in place, it's when you get busy, when there's pressure, right? You were talking about early in your career, right? When maybe you don't have as much of the things satisfied, there's pressure, there's all of that. If you've already made the decisions in advance, which are the better long-term business decisions, right? Then you're not thinking about whether or not to do something. It's done.
Let's hang on prospecting for a second, because I would argue it's the most important thing and the most costly thing for an agent to ignore or to skip. Teresa and I have both had these conversations with agents who, have closed a bunch of deals, and now they're standing at the face of like LCAP, right? Like they're standing at the face of a mountain, and they're like, how am I going to get up on there? And even though we've had these conversations with them time and time again, 5, 6, 10 times, and every time they do it, it is the most daunting when you're standing in front of, a sky-high wall that you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get up there. And if they would have just focused on prospecting, even when they were busy, they would have been able to jump from peak to peak and limited the amount of time they spent in the valley. So I would argue that the most important time to prospect is actually when you're the most busy and have the least amount of time. But too often they skip that. And I think, and Teresa and I both sit sort of on this generational shift where I think we have old souls, but we're seeing the next generation,
Great way to put it, right?
Thank you.
be raised in this way of wanting instant gratification, in a way of being told to do something and then look up and say, okay, what's next? Without the ability to truly have that proactivity and without truly having the ability to understand, to use your word, intentionality behind it. And they're being raised in, the social media generation where it's, let me go jump in a pool and I'll get all the clients and the listings and it'll sell, right? So I think that there's just this generational sort of mindset shift that is not supporting how competent professionals generally need to show up to do business today.
We talked a lot about, what we mentioned a few times, work-life balance, okay? Most of us have family, most of us have friends, most of us have, a life outside of real estate. And, when you work as a real estate agent, you realize sometimes that, it's not like your traditional 9-to-5 job. You come home, you have the weekends free, you don't have to worry about it. As a real estate agent, aside from everything else I do, real estate is in my head 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Scary place to be.
Scary. Very scary. But it's constantly there. So when we talk about work-life balance, how do we manage that, Jared? I mean, because it's not always so easy.
Don't ask me. I have no friggin' idea. I'm horrible at it.
Married with children. There you go. Teresa, how do we do that? I mean, because I'm single, but I find it difficult, right? Because there's so many other things that enter your mind regularly.
Well, your mind, I don't know how much I can help you with there, but
no one can. No one can.
I mean, again, I think it's not a sexy answer, but I think a lot of this, I always end up coming back to systems, right? If we talk about, goals and standards and behaviors, and when do they fall? They fall when we're busy and when there's pressure. And so if you're relying just on willpower and discipline to hold your boundaries, you're probably going to lose, right? Like the tank gets empty at some point, right? If you have systems in place that help you, and I'm not talking about like super complicated systems,
correct,
but you should have a CRM that you understand and are willing to use, right? You should use time blocking, right? Like just really simple stuff. It doesn't make it easy, but it's simple, right? To me, it's about if you have a job that's not super demanding, your job is between 9 to 5 and the rest of your time is off. Well,
correct.
That's not the job we have, right? It's certainly not agents, right? So to me, if I were to go back into my agent days and talk to younger Teresa, a younger soul inside and out.
Go in a different industry.
Yeah. Well, no. But I would say time block it. Just because you are single doesn't mean that every hour of your life should be devoted to real estate. Right. And if it is, you are going to burn out, right? And your mind is going to be a super stressful place to be. So I would go back and I would say time block out your free time, right? Yeah. Whatever you're going to use it for, even if it's for nothing, and honor it.
Right.
Right? But I think having really good systems in place is something that, we can go into that more by standard, but like I think having really good systems in place is what helps clear the mental clutter. Because if you don't have a place for it, if your brain doesn't know that it can count on your systems to back things up for you and to remind you that what you need to do the next day and at what time of day and how, it's all going to live up here. Your mind wants to close the cycle. It's actually like a psychological thing, right? If there's something you need to do, and it's why they tell you to write things down at night, right? If you can't fall asleep because you keep thinking about it.
I can feel it sometimes trying to close.
Yeah,
Believe
exactly,
me, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if your brain is basically like, oh no, Teresa's got that. She's got a system in place for that. She's not going to drop the ball on that. Yeah. I can go to sleep.
All right, with that, we're going to take a quick break. Coming right back after these messages. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. The More Network. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Brian Scott Cohen, one of the top loan originators in the country, and the #1 mortgage originator at Guaranteed Rate Infinity. Guaranteed Rate Infinity arguably has the most advanced tech in the industry. Our completely digital loan process makes it easy and efficient for homeowners, from a 15-minute pre-approval to the digital application and through closing. My team and I would love to help you get into the home of your dreams.
From residential and commercial closings to litigation, Romer DeBoss is your full-service real estate law firm. We blend big firm knowledge with boutique-level attention, delivering outcomes that exceed every expectation. Contact us at romerdeboss.com.
Okay, Jared, what happens when someone sets ambitious production goals, okay, and we all have ambitious production goals, without clear, as we keep talking about, standards underneath those goals? I mean, if you just forget the standards, forget the professionalism, the preparation, the whatever else is, how do they succeed with just goals? Do they tick people off? Are they not as welcoming to people? Maybe?
The short answer is they're simply not going to succeed.
Okay.
Because most likely they would have set a goal that is far too lofty for what their systems, foundation, processes, standards are set up for. Now, they may, but at what cost? What's the burnout? What are they going to do in terms of sacrificing or compromising their standards or their integrity? What is the effect going to have, on their reputation and things like that? So I think the importance is knowing that hitting your goals for one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, whatever that is okay. But the reality is, how do you actually put consistent performance so that you know that the business that you're building is going to pay you dividends? Part of the issue with our industry is that every year you start at zero, right? You're back to square one. You can be the best producer or the worst. On January 1st, you have produced the same amount. Many other industries, you're getting paid a residual off of previous business, but in this business, you're not. And that can be incredibly scary, but it also creates an opportunity to reset, as Teresa talked about at the start of every year. So you need to make sure that you're having that intentionality, that you're building a business that is going to pay you that dividend. Going back to what we spoke about a little bit before, when you look at a client and you look at how that client is treating you before you ever enter into a relationship, think very carefully if that's a client that you want to take on. I've coached countless agents over my years who to basically turn away a seller or to turn away a buyer because the demands of that client are ones that the agent wasn't going to be able to comfortably meet. Doesn't mean that the demands of the client were wrong. It just meant they weren't matched for that agent, and it would have created stress, conflict, and a bad experience. Rather, that agent should devote time to the client that they're going to be able to create a good experience and a good result. So that client becomes a raving fan for life and becomes an incredible referral source. So that's an important lens to look through as you're marching towards your goals is, great, I may make X amount of dollars from this client today, but what's the residual value and how am I going to work to make sure that I nurture and monetize that for the future? And that's where having a CRM comes into play. I'm amazed by how many successful agents I speak to that have no system in place from a CRM. They have an Excel sheet or their mind or their legal pads.
Or not even.
And it's crazy because they say they're very successful and objectively they are. And the question is, how much more successful could they have been if they have developed even a rudimentary system to be able to take that mental load off, to be able to leverage themselves? And I think that's the biggest piece is at some point, everyone caps out with how much that they can do. And at that point, you either will do more, but you're going to compromise or sacrifice the level of service that you're going to put out, or you're going to simply just hit your max capacity and leave your potential unreached. So having the right tools, having the right systems in place allows you to leverage yourself and leverage your business, which gives you scale. And in this day of age, as we're seeing more larger teams and things like that take more market share, scale becomes everything.
Scale is everything. I mentioned a couple of things as my standards earlier. Teresa, you run a big firm and you manage agents, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about knowledge and data and how important that is. I think a lot of agents sometimes kind of skim through stuff. I mean, this guy over here writes brilliant reports for us every Monday, I think it is, or whenever, and they're wonderful to read. I read every one of them because I'm a kind of a data freak. I'm a news junkie and all that kind of stuff. I want to know this stuff because to be knowledgeable and to be able to communicate, which is another one of my standards, to my customers. In fact, I was doing that this morning on the train coming in from the suburbs due to the storm. And I'm like, you have to be able to clearly communicate data and knowledge. How important do you think that is for your agents, and do they get it? To understand the data, to go and get the data, and to be able to share their knowledge?
Well, I think it's very important. I think it's very important, obviously, just to be able to do your job on a basic level of competency, right? I mean,
We do, but do they?
I think so. I think people sometimes get intimidated by the data, right? You get a lot of people who are very good people,
Right.
but they're not necessarily as good on the, maybe understanding the macroeconomic picture around what's happening in real estate. So I think it's important as a brokerage to be providing that data in a number of different ways, right? The way I can tell you just between Jared and me, the way he absorbs data is very different from the way I absorb data, right? Like I feel like it's second language for you, To me, I feel like I have a real good grasp of the people side of economics, right? Like why things are moving where they're moving, because I feel like I just kind of get people, so the numbers then make sense to me in that sense. But we try in our monthly meetings to make it very much, I want to make sure that everybody in our office knows how to answer the question, how's the market? Yeah. Right, as a bare minimum. And then you have to be really good at obviously analyzing a property, right? And how does that compare? And I think a lot of times that you don't have to be an economist, right?
No,
to understand how to evaluate a
Right.
property. And I think the really important standard, that goes back to what I was saying about how you prepare, whether it's for a buyer appointment or a listing appointment. Like you have to do CMAs, like really good CMAs. You have to be looking on whatever your data source is, get to know it well, use it well, check a couple of other data sources, and just really have that done. It's not about going on a pitch and just trying to be somebody's friend. Maybe you will win some listings that way, but there's no way you're hitting your potential, and you're absolutely not doing the kind of job that you should be doing.
100%. Jared, personal branding, self-development, constantly wanting to get your message out there. How do you advise agents in how to do that? Because I talk to people sometimes, and when they say to me, what do you mean by personal branding? Okay, take my social media class and you'll hear a little bit more about that. But I mean, seriously, how do you get them to understand how important it is to personal brand yourself, get your message out there from a development perspective, and learn a little bit or a lot every day, every week, every month, because that's what we're here to do. Our industry changes dynamically and constantly.
Right. Well, similar to setting standards before you set goals, you need to define who you are. Who are you as an agent? What is your value proposition? What's your USP, right? Your unique selling proposition. And who then is your target audience? Until you can define that, you don't know where that audience is, what platform there are, how to reach them, and what communication, should you put out into the marketplace. So you need to first be able to define that, and then you can go and meet the market where it is. For some, it is on social, and they are natural behind the camera and generating content, but that's not for everyone. And, I firmly believe that the amount of true business that's generated over social media is overblown. I think social media is incredible from a staying top of mind, client retention, and just general awareness strategy. So I am in no way saying social media is not important. I believe it is, and it's incredibly important, especially during an elongating sales cycle and especially post-close. So I highly recommend agents, like follow and friend their clients, because that's a great way after the transaction to stay in touch. But it's not always the best way to be able to generate new clients. We are in an experience environment, an experience economy. So network where your clients are. Back to Teresa's point about, making sure that you carve out time in your day to do things that you love, then figure out what those things are and be able to do them. And through those shared experiences, make relationships with other people. They become, aware of who you are, what type of person you are. They're aware that you do real estate, and you will naturally create opportunities through that. That, I think, is an incredibly important piece, that is not always consciously, done. So you have to first understand who that audience is, then be able to go and meet them where they are. And, there's really a couple different important pieces of content to be able to put out. Sure, there's the market stats and everything, just being able to give general awareness. There should be a lot of more touchy-feely, sort of like, this is my experience navigating the market. This is what's happening. These are some pitfalls. And then there should be a lot of pizzazz around, hey, these are some flashy properties, that get people to just see them and want to engage of having something. But being able to make sure that you have a varied sort of strategy that, again, speaks to who you are as a person and, more importantly, who your audience is, and humanizes yourself, where it's not just about specific things, but it's creating a larger sort of human element of you as a well-rounded person. And naturally, you're going to attract people that are more akin to who you are, because we're each unique, and there's always a client for every person out there. So.
And I say all the time, everything starts with who you are, what is your why, et cetera, because once you figure that out, then you can easily brand yourself and get yourself out there. Teresa, how do defining standards, reduce burnout or even inconsistency in agents or anybody for that matter? Because that can happen a lot and frequently in our industry.
Absolutely. I think you have burnout or when your standards are not aligned with your behavior. Right? I think you were talking about what can you be doing in January and February. Look back at the last year. When did you feel resentful? When did you feel proud? Right? Look at the situations where you felt proud of how something went, how you handled it. That's in line with your standards. Where did you feel resentful? Right? That you were having to do something that you didn't want to do or didn't feel right. Right? Was it that listing you took on that was overpriced, and then when offers did come in or negotiations did start to happen, you didn't feel like you were operating from a place of strength, right? Or a place that was in line with your values. Were you answering that text at 10 o'clock at night, resenting the fact that you had to? Well, you never put any boundaries in place. Of course you're answering the text at 10. You sent a text at 9, right? So where are the places that you don't feel an alignment? That's what's causing you stress and burnout, right? So that's where I think standards really help. You're setting the rules. They're up to you. It's a lot easier to feel resentful and stressed and to burn out when you feel like something's being imposed on you, right? When you are reactive instead of leading, right? You are running a business. Act like it. Act like a leader, right? You are the boss. You decide the rules. Right? You also decide when you make the exception to the rule. I'm not insane. Like, there are times when you answer a 10 o'clock text.
Of course.
Right?
Absolutely.
But you really have to be intentional. If you are setting the rules, I think you will find that burnout is a lot less about how hard and how often you work and a lot more about who's making the rules for your business and how you live your life.
And I think, as far as setting the rules for yourself, I think if they're the right rules and you communicate them properly, people are going to follow them. And people are going to want to work with you because you're clearly defining what the rules of the game are, how we're going to proceed, how we're going to do whatever. Makes total sense for me, and I think, for the rest of you. Once standards are defined, though, Jared, how can you ensure they hold up when the pace picks up and the market becomes very demanding, as we know it can be, and then sometimes we're flying by the seat of our pants, running all over the place, running down the street with our hair on fire. How do we control those standards and make sure that we stick to them once they're defined, once we appreciate them, once we understand them?
Admittedly, it's very difficult to do so, but you yourself are the only one that can hold yourself accountable to doing that, right? To the extent
and
that
everybody
you have
is different,
a coach or someone else, that becomes an accountability partner.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's up to you, right? And there's so much in this business that we do not have control over, right? And me personally, one of the biggest drains of my energy is when things are happening that either I don't have control over or people are not meeting their stated, time commitments, right? Even a simple story of last night, my snowplow guy was supposed to come. He said, I'll be there later today. Then he said, I'll be there in the evening. He didn't come until 3 a.m. So here I am concerned that I'm not going to be able to get out of my driveway. My anxiety was running high. I watched a lot of TV in the middle of the night because I didn't sleep. And usually I sleep very, very well. So these are simple things. If he would have just told me, like, I'll be there, between 2 and 4 a.m., like, no worries, you'll be able to get, like, that would have been fine. And I would have been able to control my internal narrative. So I am so I preach this all the time about having that no update and that over communication as a real estate professional to the client, because the reality is everyone's going to invent their own narratives that are far worse, right? I was inventing all sorts of narratives, in my head about this that are far worse than the reality. So why allow that to fester? Right.
Absolutely.
And as an agent, we owe it to our clients to be able to provide them that update. Every couple of days, if we have a listing, what's going on? Because if we don't, what happens is that breeds mistrust, and that, has the client believing their own narrative that we are not doing our job. So any conversation when it comes to a price drop or a negotiation becomes that much more difficult, because their narrative is that you, their agent, didn't do everything in your power to get their home sold. So if you show your work all the time, that helps you, be able to maintain control. And does that take a little bit more time day to day? Absolutely. But on the aggregate, you're saving a ton of time because you're not having to put out fires later on. So as a way to be able to hold to your standards and be able to protect that time block, if you do the little things every day, right? If you communicate, if you provide that no update. So, hey, Teresa, I know I was going to let you know by 10 a.m., today what's going on with the buyers. Just want to let you know I checked in with their agent. I haven't heard back. I'm on top of it. Don't worry. I got you, right? That little bit of check-in is going to give Teresa, at least if she was me, a bit more peace of mind and comfort. And that is so powerful because it'll save me hours later on of having to deal with Teresa being frustrated that she hasn't heard from me and thinking that I'm doing something, wrong.
I just want to piggyback on that real quick,
sure.
Vince, because I think the tactical here helps a lot. I absolutely agree with everything Jared said. And I think the tough thing is when things do get busy and hectic, balls drop, right? Like I didn't text you because it was hectic and it was such a huge snowstorm. And I had this person calling me. And, when it's so busy, that's when you're likely to forget to do the things that you should do. And that's why, for me, having that system in place is so important. Like one of the CRM that we use is set up so that with current clients, you get a nudge. I think it's every 2 days if you haven't already reached out to them to reach out to them. Like there are different cadences for different people. So the nudge is there so that as long as you still hold sacred, whatever hour you have in the day for current clients, you won't forget to do that, right? Or that hour is there and you're like, you know what? I've got to go on an appointment there. I've either got to move that later in the day or I have to get my assistant to do that today, even though I would normally do it. It's not ideal, but I'll just tell them to say, hey, so-and-so's on it. You'll hear from them tomorrow morning. But having those systems in place so that there's at least something alerting you that you're forgetting something, right? When you do, because we're going to forget. We're going to get hectic.
And go ahead. That's why they say the best offense is a great defense, right? So all those little things that we just described, that's the defense, right? Going out there and prospecting, going on pitches, that's the offense. And one of the biggest mistakes I see agents make is not investing in that admin help until it's too late. You have to invest in that admin help early because that's the only way that you're going to be able to break through to that next level without sacrificing your mental sanity, your standards or things like that. And there's a lot of different ways to be able to go and get that. But, and this is an important but, you can't effectively support that admin or assistant if you don't have the right systems and processes, because you need someone else to be able to pick up what you've put down and they're not in your brain, reading your mind. So you need to be able to work out of a shared database that they can follow what's along. So agents have to set the right structure from the get-go, and they need to be able to leverage help earlier than they may think to be able to truly get to the next level.
Okay, with that, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, we're going to talk about maybe the agents are afraid. And we're going to talk a little bit about culture. Don't go anywhere. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Dylan Pachulik, CEO of XL Real Property Management, New York's most trusted name in luxury property management since 2012. We specialize in managing individual apartments, townhouses, and rental buildings held by absentee owners. We maintain our properties with the highest standards of quality and service so that owners can choose a hassle-free approach to real estate investing. Rented or owner-occupied, we handle it all. For more information, contact us at xl-rpm.com.
And we are back. Okay, so let me ask you, okay? You've managed agents for a long time. Teresa has. I have in my past. When we talk about, getting our standards straight and correct, when we talk about setting our goals properly and behaving, I like that word behavior that you've used a few times today, behaving in the right professional way. How much of it is when an agent, kind of falls down or gets nervous or didn't respond to a text and they come up with an excuse or whatever? How much is it because they really don't know? They're really inexperienced, or they haven't, really been trained well? Because I run up against this all the time when I'm teaching real estate, and it's almost like intimidation sometimes, and they don't really understand what they should be doing, even if they understand what a standard is, even if they understand what a goal is. Oh my God, how do I put it all together? And it's not that they're brand new at it. Some people just don't focus, right? Comment?
It's all in the tact of how they handle. It's totally okay not to know something. It's not okay to lie, make something up, or to pretend that you do know it. Right. And, so if Teresa asks me a question and I don't know the answer, I have a couple different options. I can either make it up and lie. That's not a good option, so we're going to throw that one out. I can say very frankly, that's a great question. I don't actually know the answer, or that's a great question. Let me confirm and get back to you, right? At least then I'm acknowledging receipt and letting you know. Or even better, you can say, hey, Teresa, great question. I'm tied up, on an appointment or with another client. Let me get back to you in 2 hours. That gives you enough time to go and speak to your manager or speak to a colleague or your team leader and get the answer and get back. But at least I've said to the client, I hear you, I got you, and I set an expectation for when I'll get back to you, and then make sure that you do. Or if you can't, then say, hey, so sorry, appointment ran a couple minutes longer. Give me another 30 minutes and I'll be back to you.
And Vince, I want to address what you said about focus, because I think everything Jared said makes sense for the micro, right? Like, what in the moment do you do? But if you're talking about the macro, is it that agents lacked focus, or that they, I think there are a lot of agents. I think most agents are either artists or operators. Right, I think that's like an old Tom Ferry thing. But regardless of his coaching mechanism, I think for operators, they're already doing some version of this, right? And if they hear this, they're probably picking up some tips on how to do it better. For the artists, who are great hustlers, great generators, the idea of putting together systems probably makes them want to stick a pencil in their eye, right? Yeah. So some of it is just like, that's not how it works. It's not exciting. It's not what's worked for me. And I think this is a little bit of a situation of what got you here won't get you there, right? Like, you've done great on your natural talent, but now you do need to start to think about some of these things. And how do you do that? Well, go to your manager. If you're at the kind of firm where the manager has the bandwidth to help you with this, go to your manager. If you're not, engage a coach. If you can't afford a coach, find a good accountability partner, right? Somebody who will help you instill a little bit of structure and take baby steps. But it's not really, this is something you have to do if you want your business to grow and be a real business. Otherwise, you're just going to hustle and keep hustling, and that's a recipe for burnout real quick.
And as you look to grow your team or bring on the right admin, it's important to be truthful with yourself about what your personality traits are, the things that give you energy, the things that drain you, and to really then understand what's the complement, right? Ben Willig, who we all know very well at this table, who's our head of agent growth and strategy here, does this all the time with our agents and teams who are looking to grow, and he administers personality tests, and we try to really make sure that we're aligning the right people, because very often salespeople or team leaders are horrible managers, right? And we don't see a lot of good stickiness with teams or admin because, the team leader expects the admin to know everything coming in, which is not practical. And the team leader isn't the best trainer because very often they're just out there running. So we need to make sure that we blend that right personality and we have the right training and development so that we can make that a sticky match. But it is so important to know and to be truthful with yourself. And, I can think back of this one team in particular that was polar opposite, yin and yang, in terms of who they are and how they complemented, where neither would have been great on their own, but together they were a super team, because one was that operator, one was that artist, and they truly, divvied up the deal, and they made that clear at the start to the client. Look, this is going to be the guy handling all the analysis and back office, and this is the guy that you're going to run around the city with and have a ton of fun. And they made it work magically.
I totally agree. Let's talk about culture, one of my favorite words, okay? So clearly defined standards shape the culture of a team, or brokerage for that matter, or should, right? How are standards and cultures the same, or are they?
It's interesting. You said they should have standards. I think every team or company has standards, whether they're high standards or standards that were intentionally chosen or not.
Better said, yeah.
They are there, right? So if you want to be successful, whether it's as a brokerage or as a team, I think you need to be intentional about that. And it's interesting because I think this actually relates back to what you were saying about brand, right? If an authentic brand, which is what really resonates with people, I think, is something that is built on intentional core values, right? And if you have, I think a lot of teams miss out on this because they are at first reactive, right? And then they start to kind of get it together. But like you hear a lot about team leads struggling with getting the right people, with managing people.
Yeah, I wanted to touch back. Go ahead.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think I think brokerages hopefully are better at this because you've got a whole team at the top that has time and energy to devote to this, right? That's our job. We certainly do that at Platinum and put a lot of time and energy into that. But a lot of team leaders are stretched thin, and I don't even know, how much they're thinking about this. But I think if you really take some time to articulate, who am I? Right? Like, what are my top 4 core values? Like, who is this team? And you have these kinds of systems and structures in place, and this is how we operate. That's when you're going to attract the right people to your team, right? And just like with a brokerage, that's not always the top producer in the industry. You don't always want that person, right? You want somebody who's going to work well within your systems, structures, core values. That's culture. That's culture. And you have to enforce your standards and systems and structures. If you want to retain that culture, you have to protect it.
Yeah. And I guess based on what you just said, which is also, I agree 100%, the culture is one thing, standards are another, or they blend definitely. But when you have a team, and not to focus on teams, but when you have a team and 5 or 6 people and everyone is different, so, their standards may be different, some of them may, map with others, but how easy or how difficult is it to get that team to function properly where everybody is on the right page or the same page and they can go out there and approach their client set properly? I can see it being sometimes a little messy.
Sure. Well, I think if you're a team lead, it's your job to lead, right? So you have to decide. You decide what those standards are. You decide what those core values are. And then there are going to be people who are right for your team and people who are not right for your team. Now, you don't want everybody to be the same. Right. Then you got a problem, right? That's what we were talking about before. We definitely want people with different strengths. But at the end of the day, people have to be aligned with your standard operating procedures, with how you do things, because they're going out there and they're representing you and your team, and so that you can function well as a team. I think a lot of one of the things that gets in the way of leaders is that they are, and understandably, they're very, very busy, but it's easy to shy away from hard conversations. And just like an employer with a manager with an employee, a team lead with any junior agent or assistant, you've got to either be coaching people up or coaching them out. Do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do it? Right? And those 3 things, you need to be having conversations based on that all along the way. And if somebody isn't meeting that criteria, after you've tried to coach them up, you're coaching them out. Right? And you have to be willing to do that. You have to be proactive. You have to lead instead of being reactive.
I mean, when I was running my own firm for 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, I wanted to know people's personal standards, okay? And because I tried to map them to what the firm's standards were. And sometimes I'd be interviewing somebody and say, not really, not going to work. Because I think I could tell or perceive that person's going to be stuck in the mud, do their own thing, maybe successful, but maybe going to tick people off, you know, in the rest of the agent pool. So it was kind of like a tough go for me sometimes, and I would turn people away more than I would accept them if their personal standards, and I would ask them, you know, point blank, how do you feel about that? I mean, it's important, right? As a leader in a firm, in a large firm, you know the culture here is amazing. I mean, I'm here because I love the culture, and I've been here for 100 years. But what do you think about that?
I think you have to be very careful about who comes into the company because it has the ability to either add or detract from the culture. And to Teresa's point, you know, some of the highest producing brokers in the city would not be a culture fit, you know, here or in other places. So you have to consider everything through opportunity cost, right? If you just look at a potential revenue, you're missing your ability to calculate your business, whether this is on the brokerage level or on the individual agent or team level. You have to understand, if I take this, I might make X, but what am I giving up, or what opportunities am I foregoing, or what is it going to cost me in terms of other business potentially being lost? And I think that's incredibly important. And the biggest mindset shift that any agent needs to make is going from being a salesperson, where they think that I get a lead or get a client and I close them, right, to being a business owner where it's I'm running a full business. Yes, I'm associated with the brokerage that's going to be best fitted to support my business, but this is my business. I'm the CEO. I'm in charge of marketing, sales, operation, recruiting, you name it. And that mindset shift is the number one thing. So if I'm interviewing someone, I'm interviewing to see if they have that mindset shift, because if they don't, it's not going to work for them and for me. If they have that mindset, the sky's the limit and we can do whatever we want to a partner, because I can't instill a certain mindset in someone. That's my belief.
No.
I can teach anyone anything about real estate, success,
but not a mindset.
But I cannot get them to be self-motivating. I cannot get them to have that mindset shift. I cannot get them to be, you know, that self-starter that just wants to pull out their bootstraps and go and get it. To me, that's innate, and that people need to be able to figure out the way to get that themselves.
Let's go back to January. We talked about it before. January, February, kind of slow, right? I come from corporate America. January, all we heard from management in corporate America was goals, goals, goals. You know, quota, quota, quota. How are you going to get there, Vince? How are you going to get there, you know, whomever? We determined that that's not the right way to approach it here in real estate. So in January, in February, as leaders in companies, what kind of conversations do you start with agents when they come to you and say, well, you know, I had a good year last year, or as you said earlier, maybe not such a good year, but how can I do better this year? What should I be focused? I mean, I hear it, you know, just within the agent pool. How can I focus better, or what can I do better to be better this year? What do you say to these people? I mean, we talked about a whole bunch of things, but what do you say to these people?
I think it depends on the agent, of course, where they are in their level of the level of their career. But I think this idea of starting with standard, you know, because I just think they're the agents who are so clearly primed to start scaling.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a little bit different from the agent who has just started out in their career and really, but a lot of times the agents who are ready to start scaling still haven't defined those standards. Right. So I think it's a really good place to start. When do I respond? These are really simple things that will make you sound so credible and so professional with any client that you're working with, right? You know, what are my standards around response time? What are my standards around preparation? And preparation can be any kind of appointment, right, with a client. What are my standards around pricing, and what are my standards around my time and protecting my time and my business development? And then with an agent who's a little bit further in their career, it's how do I start to leverage that, right? How do I start to bring people on? The systems can come first for a lot of agents. For some agents, it's that partnership. So I would say if you don't have it, the manager, the coach, the accountability partner, somebody to really help you start figuring out the best way to create these systems to support the standards.
In your opinion, in your experience, what separates producers from true leaders when it comes to operating principles? I mean, we talked about all of this stuff very brilliantly today, but you know.
They're either more well-rounded or they had enough self-awareness to be able to bring in the resources necessary to be able to flank their shortcomings or their weaknesses, right? top producers need to be firing on all cylinders, and very few people can do it all themselves. So they need to make sure that they're bringing in the right people with a complementary skill set. I would also add that they would be setting their 2026 goals around Thanksgiving of the previous year. If you're waiting till January, February, you've already lost a quarter of the year. So going back to that proactivity, let's take stock of where did our year go before. You'll be able to forecast out what's going to close, because by early November, you pretty much know what's in the pipeline for the rest of that year and the start of the following year. So those are really the most important things to me, is, again, back to that proactivity and doing it early.
Yeah, and anybody who knows me or have taken any of my classes, I use the term banana heads, okay? Because on the street, I call them other things. But on the, in public, they're banana heads. And there's a lot of banana heads out there, whether they're team leaders, whether they're successful real estate agents, and sometimes you just want to belt them, okay, hit them. And I look at them sometimes and say, as we were talking through this conversation, well, do they have standards? Probably not. Do they care about anything other than themselves? Probably not. Are they transactionally oriented versus relationship? Yeah. And to me, that's a problem. Okay, so when we talk about all of these wonderful things about being prepared, being on brand, being knowledgeable, understanding the data, communicate properly, becoming that professional, how do these people get away with it? I'm not putting either one of you on the spot, or I'm not saying that you have them or don't have them in your firms, but how do they get away with it? Because I look at them sometimes and say, wow, 24 years in this industry, holy you know what? And a lot of them are top producers.
I think it's a matter of, I think to me, the banana heads are probably on the, if we go back to this idea of hustle energy versus discipline.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's hustle, get out there, put on a great show, right? And especially, I mean, a lot of people aren't choosing their agents based on reputation, right? They don't even know. They're like, maybe they got a recommendation from a friend, maybe they found somebody online. But you can actually be transactional and keep going, but you're going to burn out. And I think so. To me, you're talking about being a leader versus a producer, right? A producer has that hustle energy. A leader has a different kind of energy. They're focused on discipline. They're, a leader when they walk in a room, right? Versus a hustler who comes in with that energy 100%. Of, you're talking about, are they in it for themselves? Are they in it for this transaction? I think there's a very real thing that happens when you are more calm. When you're walking in knowing that you're willing to let that listing walk away if it doesn't meet your standards, right? That you're willing to not make an offer to an agent if they have top revenue because they're going to poison your well. That's a different energy that you walk into a room with. And to me, that's the difference between a hustler, a producer, and somebody who's a real leader, even if they are a leader of one.
Last thought.
At risk of discrediting everything I've just said for the last 58 minutes, I would argue, though, that hustler, real estate, as I like to say, is a contact sport. So if you're a hustler and you have a better network of more people that want to do business with you, no matter your systems or anything else, you may do more business than the person with the best system. So I still, at the end of the day, this comes down to who you know, and that's why prospecting and building genuine relationships is still the most important thing. And to me, as technology, as AI becomes ubiquitous, the differentiator is not how you use AI or whether you use it or not. It truly is going to come back to the human element, the relationships, the soft skills, the ability to follow up and follow through. So I would challenge everyone, if you want to be successful today, focus on the human element, focus on the real relationships, because at the end of the day, you can be the smartest person in real estate. But if you don't know the right people, you won't do as much business as your potential allows you. So the ultimate way to unlock your full potential is to meet as many people as possible. And to the agents that have a full load of business because they are that hustler, you're still selling yourself short if you don't have the right systems in place to be able to harness all of the people that want to be able to do business with you.
Jaron Anton, Teresa Stevenson, thank you so much. Great conversation. Coming right back after these messages with my final thoughts.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
Okay, everybody, we are back with my final thoughts. As we move into 2026, remember this: goals measure outcomes, standards determine outcomes. The market will fluctuate, volume will rise and fall, competition will intensify. None of this is fully in our control. Your standards are in your control: how you prepare, how you communicate, how you protect your time, how you show up when it's inconvenient. If you raise your standards, your performance has to follow. If you leave them vague, your results will be unpredictable. So before this year starts, or it's actually started, ask more of you. Decide, who you're going to be in your business, not what you hope to achieve, how you intend to operate. Because when standards are clear, success stops feeling accidental, it becomes inevitable. And always remember, as Vince says, be memorable every day. And that's it for this episode of Talking New York Real Estate. And as we move through the year, we should always remember it's not about grand promises or overnight change, it's about intention. Choosing clarity over noise, growth over comfort, and being deliberate with how we show up every day. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching and being a part of the conversation. If this episode brought value, share it, subscribe, and keep asking the questions that matter. Until next time, stay informed, stay intentional, and keep finding your space. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Substack, or TikTok at Vince Rocco. And John Maxwell says, a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. And from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate and the More Network, to all of you all around the world, thanks for spending a part of your day with us. I am grateful. Keep thinking the good thoughts, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.